The champagne glasses clinked around me as my father stood up, his arm wrapped possessively around his new bride. "I'd like to thank everyone for coming," he announced, his voice carrying across the reception hall. Then his eyes found me sitting alone at a table in the corner. His smile turned cold. "Some of you might recognize Anissa there. She's nothing but a bastard child from my youth." Gasps rippled through the crowd as he quickly turned away proudly, introducing his new stepdaughter as his real daughter. The room spun around me as I fought back tears until suddenly the young woman in the pastel bridesmaid dress looked my way. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Oh my God!" she screamed. "She is my commanding general!" I never wanted to attend my father's third wedding. As a 32-year-old Army lieutenant colonel with over 14 years of service, I had more important things to do than watch Greg Harper pledge his undying love to yet another woman. But something pulled me back to my hometown of Springfield, perhaps a childish hope that this time would be different. My mother died when I was 10 years old. Cancer. It was quick and brutal, leaving me alone with a father who never quite figured out how to raise a daughter on his own. Before her death, life had been different. Mom was warm, attentive, and fiercely protective. She read me bedtime stories every night and taught me how to stand up for myself when other kids teased me about my curly hair or the gap between my front teeth. "You're special, Anissa," she'd tell me. "Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." After she was gone, the house felt empty. Dad buried himself in work, leaving me with a series of babysitters and housekeepers. He wasn't cruel, just absent. The framed photos of my mother slowly disappeared from the walls, tucked away in boxes in the attic where her memory couldn't intrude on his new life. When I was 12, he married Linda. She had bleached blonde hair and wore too much perfume, but she tried to be nice to me at first. That changed when she realized Dad was perfectly happy to let her handle all the daughter problems while he focused on expanding his construction business. By 14, I was essentially raising myself while Linda complained about the ungrateful teenager ruining her new marriage. High school was a blur of loneliness punctuated by small academic triumphs that went unnoticed at home. I joined every club I could find just to avoid going back to a house where I felt like an unwelcome guest. When Dad and Linda had twins during my sophomore year, I became even more invisible. All the attention went to the babies Jackson and Amber while I retreated further into my studies. The military became my escape plan. I applied to West Point without telling anyone, using my guidance counselor as my reference. When the acceptance letter came, I left it on the kitchen counter for 3 days before Dad noticed it. "The Army. That's no place for a girl," he said dismissively. "You'll wash out in a week." Those words lit a fire in me. I graduated high school with honors and left for basic training 2 weeks later. No one came to see me off. The Army became the family I never had. I thrived in the structure and discipline, quickly rising through the ranks. I discovered I had a talent for leadership and strategy that earned me respect from both superiors and subordinates. By 28, I had completed 2 tours in Afghanistan, earned a Bronze Star, and was promoted to lieutenant colonel. Through it all, I maintained minimal contact with my father. Christmas cards, occasional phone calls on birthdays if he remembered, and a brief visit when I was stateside between deployments. During that visit, he seemed uninterested in my military career, changing the subject whenever I mentioned it. I learned that he and Linda had divorced, the twins were in college, and he was dating someone new. So when the wedding invitation arrived at my apartment in Virginia, I was surprised. It had been nearly 3 years since I'd spoken to him. The cream-colored envelope contained a formal invitation to the wedding of Gregory Harper and Diane Sullivan, along with a handwritten note. "Anissa, it would mean a lot if you could be there. Dad." Those 5 words reignited that same childish hope. Maybe he was finally reaching out. Maybe after all these years he wanted to rebuild our relationship. I requested leave, bought a conservative navy blue dress, and flew to Illinois. The ceremony was held at an upscale country club, the kind of place my father always aspired to belong. I slipped into the back of the church, watched him kiss his new bride, and followed the crowd to the reception, hoping for a moment to reconnect. Instead, I got a public humiliation. My father, champagne flowing freely, decided to use his wedding speech to disown me in front of 150 guests. The stares of pity that followed were almost worse than his words. I sat frozen, the untouched salmon on my plate growing cold, as I considered slipping out the back door. That's when his new stepdaughter screamed those impossible words, changing everything in an instant. The reception hall fell silent as all eyes turned from me to the young woman standing beside my father. Tiffany Sullivan, according to the wedding program, was 25 years old with honey blonde hair styled in elegant waves. She wore a pale pink bridesmaid dress and an expression of absolute shock. "Tiffany, what are you talking about?" My father laughed nervously, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You must be confused." But Tiffany shrugged him off, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "That's Lieutenant Colonel Harper. She was my commanding officer in Afghanistan 2 years ago." The whispers began immediately spreading through the crowd like wildfire. I remained seated, my back straight face composed from years of military discipline. Inside, my heart hammered against my ribs. I had never expected these two separate worlds to collide so spectacularly. "This is ridiculous," my father scoffed, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Anissa works in an office somewhere. She's never been to Afghanistan." His dismissal of my entire career cut deeper than the bastard child comment. 14 years of service, and he didn't even know what I did. I watched as his new wife Diane whispered something in his ear, clearly trying to defuse the situation. I had two choices: retreat or stand my ground. The military had taught me that sometimes the hardest terrain is the most important to defend. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked toward the head table. "Hello, Tiffany," I said calmly. "It's good to see you again, though I admit these aren't the circumstances I would have expected." Tiffany saluted instinctively before catching herself. "Ma'am, I had no idea you were related to Greg. This is... wow." My father looked between us, his face flushing red. "What is this nonsense, Anissa? Stop embarrassing me at my wedding." "I'm not trying to embarrass you, Dad," I said, keeping my voice level. "But since you brought up my status in this family publicly, I think it's only fair that I get to speak my piece as well." The reception hall grew quieter, guests leaning forward in their seats. "For the record, my mother was your wife, not some random woman you knocked up as you seem to be implying to your guests. You were married for 12 years and her name was Sarah. I've noticed you've erased her from your life so thoroughly that your new wife probably doesn't even know she existed." His face darkened. "Your mother is irrelevant to this day. This is about me and Diane starting our new life together." "And apparently about publicly disowning your daughter," I added. "I came here hoping to reconnect, Dad. I've been gone a long time serving our country, which you'd know if you'd ever asked." "Playing soldier doesn't make you special, Anissa," he snapped. "The military takes anyone these days." A few gasps rippled through the crowd. I noticed several older men in suits, likely veterans themselves, based on their reactions, staring at my father with thinly veiled disgust. "Lieutenant Colonel Harper isn't playing at anything," Tiffany interjected, her voice growing stronger. "She commands respect from every soldier in her battalion. She led our unit through one of the most dangerous regions in Kandahar province." My father waved his hand dismissively. Sure. I'm sure she's very important. Now can we get back to our celebration?" I was prepared to walk away to leave him to his delusions when Tiffany said something that stopped me cold. "She's not just important. She's a hero. When our convoy was ambushed outside of Kabul, she pulled 3 of us from a burning vehicle under heavy fire. She saved my life, sir." The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the room was on my father, waiting for his reaction. The look of utter confusion on his face might have been comical under different circumstances. "That's not. She couldn't have," he stammered. "I have the pictures to prove it," Tiffany continued, reaching for her phone. "I've kept them as a reminder of the bravest person I've ever served with." As Tiffany scrolled through her phone, I noticed a man in his 60s stand up from a table near the back. He walked toward us with purpose, his gait and posture immediately identifying him as military. "Colonel Franklin Peters, retired." He introduced himself to the room. "I believe I can shed some light on this situation. Lieutenant Colonel Anissa Harper received the Bronze Star with Valor 2 years ago for the exact action this young lady is describing. I was on the committee that reviewed her commendation." My father's face went from red to white as Colonel Peters extended his hand to me. "It's an honor to meet you, Colonel Harper. My son served under your command. He speaks very highly of you." As I shook his hand, another guest approached, and then another. 2 more veterans, 1 current service member, all confirming my identity, my rank, my accomplishments. My father stood frozen beside his new bride, watching as his attempted humiliation of me transformed into a spontaneous recognition of my service. The irony was almost too perfect. For years, I had kept my achievements quiet around him because he never seemed interested. Now they were being broadcast to everyone he knew. Through it all, Tiffany kept staring at me with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "I never thought I'd see you again," she said quietly, "and I certainly never imagined you'd be my stepsister." "I need some air," I said to Tiffany after the commotion finally settled. The wedding reception had resumed with an awkward tension hanging in the air. My father and Diane had retreated to circulate among safer tables, avoiding my corner of the room entirely. Tiffany nodded and followed me to the country club's terrace. The May evening was cool, but pleasant strings of white lights illuminating the manicured gardens below. "I'm still processing all of this," she admitted, leaning against the stone railing. "When Mom told me her new husband had a daughter, I pictured some random civilian, not the officer who pulled me out of that Humvee." I smiled faintly. Life has a strange way of connecting the dots. "You know, after I got home, I tried to track you down to thank you properly," Tiffany continued. "But you'd already been reassigned and no one would tell me where." "Joint Special Operations Task Force," I explained. "Most of my recent assignments are classified." Tiffany's eyes widened. "Wow. And Greg has no idea who you are, does he?" "My father stopped being interested in my life a long time ago," I said, surprising myself with how little bitterness remained in the words. "After my mother died, he just checked out. Emotionally, at least. Mom mentioned something about him being widowed young, but he never talks about it." Tiffany twisted a strand of hair around her finger, looking thoughtful. "He told Mom you were estranged because you chose to abandon the family after high school, that you only contacted him when you needed money." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's creative. I haven't asked him for a penny since I left for West Point. The Army paid for my education, and I've been financially independent ever since." West Point Tiffany looked impressed. "I enlisted right out of high school. Mom wasn't thrilled, but she supported me. My dad was never in the picture." Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of the terrace door opening. Diane Sullivan Harper stepped outside, her wedding gown shimmering in the soft lighting. She hesitated when she saw us together, clearly uncertain of her welcome. "Mind if I join you?" she asked tentatively. I gestured to the empty space beside me. "It's your wedding. I think you can go wherever you want." Diane approached cautiously, her expression difficult to read. She was in her late 40s, attractive in a polished, suburban way, with intelligent eyes that seemed to be reassessing me completely. "I owe you an apology, Anissa," she began. "Greg never told me about your military career. Actually, he told me very little about you at all, beyond that you two had a falling out years ago." "That seems to be his preferred narrative," I replied. "Mom, did you know Greg's daughter is the officer I told you about? The one who saved me during the ambush?" Tiffany asked excitedly. Diane's eyes widened. "That was you. Tiffany talked about that officer for months after she came home. Said she'd never met anyone so calm under pressure." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing my job." "No," Diane shook her head firmly. "My daughter is alive because of you. That's not just a job." She paused, twisting her new wedding ring. "This is all so strange. I feel like I'm missing pieces of a puzzle." "Welcome to the club," I said dryly. "I need to be honest with you," Diane continued, lowering her voice. "Greg's behavior tonight shocked me. That's not the man I thought I was marrying." She glanced back toward the reception. "The way he spoke about you, about your mother, it makes me wonder what else he's been hiding." "Mom, what are you saying?" Tiffany asked. Diane took a deep breath. "I found some papers in Greg's office a few weeks ago. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for our prenuptial agreement to sign. There was a file with your name on it, Anissa." My stomach tightened. "What kind of file?" "Financial documents, mostly. Statements from a trust fund, letters from attorneys." She hesitated. "I didn't read everything, but it seemed to be related to your mother's estate." "What estate?" I asked, genuinely confused. "My mother was a kindergarten teacher. She didn't have an estate." Diane looked surprised. "According to these documents, your maternal grandmother left a significant inheritance that was to be held in trust until you turned 18. Greg was the trustee." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. My grandmother Miller died when I was 16. She lived in a small apartment in Chicago. There was no money. That's not what these papers showed, Diane said quietly. There was a trust worth at least $300,000. Property in Michigan, too, a lakefront cottage. The paperwork indicated it all transferred to Greg's control after your grandmother died to be given to you when you came of age. I gripped the stone railing, memories rearranging themselves in my mind. The sudden improvement in our living situation after my grandmother died. The vacation home Dad bought the year I left for West Point. The mysterious investments that allowed him to start his own construction company. I never saw a penny of any inheritance, I said, my voice hollow. He told me Grandma Miller left everything to charity. Tiffany placed a hand on my arm. Are you saying Greg stole your inheritance? I'm not saying anything definitive, Diane backpedaled, looking worried. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe I misunderstood the documents. Or maybe my father has been lying to everyone for a very long time, I said quietly, including his new wife. The three of us stood in silence for a moment, the implications settling around us like an invisible fog. I need to see those papers, I finally said. Diane nodded slowly. They're at the house. After the honeymoon, I could— No, I interrupted. Tonight. This ends tonight. The remainder of the reception passed in a blur. I maintained my composure through the cake cutting and the first dance, all the while processing what Diane had told me. $300,000. A lakefront property. An inheritance I never knew existed, apparently stolen by the man who was supposed to protect my interests. Pieces began falling into place. My father's insistence that I couldn't afford college without his help, yet his refusal to contribute anything. His anger when I received a full scholarship to West Point. The way he'd discouraged me from pursuing my mother's family connections after my grandmother died. They want nothing to do with you, he'd told me. Better to make a clean break. I'd believed him because I had no reason not to. I was 16 and grieving the loss of my grandmother, the last connection to my mother. As the evening wound down, I spotted Tiffany in deep conversation with her mother near the gift table. They both looked troubled. When they noticed me watching, Tiffany waved me over. Mom's going to create a distraction, Tiffany whispered. We're going to slip out and go to the house. She gave me her key. What kind of distraction? I asked. Trust me, you don't want to know, Diane said grimly. Just be ready to leave in 5 minutes. True to her word. 5 minutes later, Diane was on the dance floor, apparently having tripped and twisted her ankle. As guests and wedding staff rushed to help the injured bride, Tiffany and I slipped out a side door to her car. Well, that's one way to get out of the bouquet toss, Tiffany joked as she drove us through the quiet suburban streets. Mom said she'll keep Greg at the venue as long as possible, but we should hurry. The house was a large Tudor-style home in an exclusive neighborhood, the kind of place that screamed successful businessman without being overly ostentatious. As we pulled into the driveway, I felt a strange sense of dread. This was where my father would be living with his new family. Another home where I didn't belong. Dad's office is this way, Tiffany said, leading me through the immaculate foyer to a wood-paneled study. Mom said the files are in his desk, bottom right drawer. The drawer was locked. I looked around the office, taking in the carefully curated display of success. Framed business awards, photos with local politicians, a model of his first major construction project. No pictures of me. Not even from my childhood. Let me try something, Tiffany said, examining the lock. She pulled a bobby pin from her hair and bent it into shape. At my surprised look, she shrugged. YouTube tutorials. You'd be amazed what you can learn online. To my astonishment, the lock clicked open after less than a minute of her tinkering. I'm impressed, I admitted. That's actually a useful skill. 4 brothers growing up, she explained. I had to protect my diary somehow. The drawer contained several neatly labeled file folders. Tiffany pulled them out and spread them on the desk. Here, she said, handing me one labeled Miller Trust. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside were dozens of documents spanning nearly 16 years. Investment statements, property deeds, legal correspondence, all relating to the estate of Margaret Miller, my maternal grandmother. Oh my God, I whispered as I flipped through them. It's all here. Everything Diane said and more. The trust had originally been worth just over $400,000, not the $300 Diane mentioned. There was indeed a lakefront property in Michigan, plus several investment accounts. The documents clearly stated that all assets were to be held in trust for me, with my father as trustee, until my 21st birthday. "Look at this," Tiffany said, pointing to a series of withdrawal forms. "Large sums transferred to personal accounts starting right after your grandmother died. 10,000 here, 20,000 there." My throat tightened as I continued reading. The paper trail showed a systematic draining of my inheritance. By the time I turned 21, when everything should have legally transferred to me, the accounts were nearly empty. The Michigan property had been sold, the proceeds nowhere to be found. "He stole it all," I said quietly. "Every penny that my grandmother wanted me to have." Tiffany squeezed my shoulder. "There's more," she said, handing me another file labeled Harper Construction Financing. This file contained loan applications and business formation documents for my father's construction company. The initial investment capital was listed as personal funds in the amount of $350,000. The timing aligned perfectly with the largest withdrawals from my trust. He built his entire business with my money, I realized. The business he's been bragging about for years, showing up in local business journals as a self-made success. It was all built on stolen funds. We continued searching, finding more damning evidence with each new document. Tax filings that failed to mention the trust. Letters from attorneys questioning certain transactions that were never answered. A deed transfer for the Michigan cottage showing it was sold to a business partner of my father's for well below market value, only to be resold at a profit months later with a kickback to my father. "This is criminal," Tiffany said, her voice tight with anger. "He could go to jail for this." The sound of a car door slamming outside made us both freeze. "That's Dad's Lexus," Tiffany whispered. "Mom must not have been able to stall him any longer." We hurriedly gathered the most important documents, stuffing them into Tiffany's oversized purse. I snapped photos of pages we couldn't take, working quickly as footsteps approached the front door. "We need to get out of here," Tiffany hissed, closing the drawer and relocking it with her bobby pin. But we were too late. The study door swung open, revealing my father still in his wedding tuxedo, his bow tie undone and hanging around his neck. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his gaze darting from me to Tiffany to the papers we hadn't managed to hide. His face darkened as comprehension dawned. "You're going through my private files in my house." "Actually, it's Mom's house too now," Tiffany pointed out. "She gave us permission to be here." My father ignored her, his focus entirely on me. "After you ruined my wedding reception, you break into my home to snoop through my personal business. I always knew you were ungrateful, but this is a new low, Anissa." I held up one of the trust documents. "Were you ever planning to tell me about my inheritance, Dad? Or were you just going to pretend it never existed?" His expression shifted, surprise, quickly replaced by defensiveness. "I don't know what you're talking about." $400,000, Dad. Plus the cottage on Lake Michigan. Grandma Miller's entire estate that was meant for me. "That money was used for your benefit," he said dismissively. "Who do you think paid for your upbringing? Your clothes, your food. That money was compensation for the burden of raising you alone after your mother died." His words hit me like physical blows. "My mother would be disgusted by what you've done." "Your mother isn't here," he snapped. "I made the decisions I had to make. That business supported this family for years. It was never your money to take," I said, my voice steady, despite the rage building inside me. "You were the trustee, not the beneficiary. That's theft, Dad. Plain and simple." He took a step toward me, his face flushed with anger. "You ungrateful little—" "I wouldn't finish that sentence if I were you," came a voice from the doorway. Diane stood there, still in her wedding gown, her expression stony. "Not unless you want this marriage to end on the same day it began." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. My father looked between his new wife and me, clearly calculating his next move. "Diane," he said, attempting a placating smile, "this is just a misunderstanding. Family business that got out of hand." "Is stealing from your daughter just family business?" Diane asked coldly. "Because that's what these documents show." "You too." His face hardened. "Going behind my back with them." "I found those files weeks ago," Diane admitted. "I told myself there must be an explanation. That the man I was about to marry couldn't possibly have stolen from his own child. My father's posture shifted subtly. I'd seen that look before, the seamless transition from aggression to charm that he'd perfected over the years. Sweetheart, it's complicated. The trust had provisions for caretaker compensation. Everything I did was perfectly legal. Then you won't mind explaining that to my attorney, I said, holding up my phone to show I'd been recording our conversation. I'm sure they'll be fascinated by your interpretation of fiduciary duty. His face contorted with rage. You think you can come into my home and threaten me after I gave you everything? You gave me nothing, I replied calmly. In fact, according to these documents, you took everything that was rightfully mine and used it to build the life you wanted without me in it. You want to talk about what's rightfully yours, he shouted, abandoning all pretense of control. Your mother trapped me with her pregnancy. I never wanted a child. I stayed out of obligation watching my dreams slip away year after year while she played happy family. The room fell silent. Even in my darkest moments, I'd never imagined he resented my very existence so deeply. Diane whispered, shock evident in her voice. You don't mean that. Don't tell me what I mean, he snapped. Anissa has been nothing but a disappointment from the day she was born. Too stubborn, too independent, too much like her mother. When Sarah died, I was finally free to live my own life. And then what happens? Her mother's family tries to control me from beyond the grave with conditions on money that should have been mine from the start. His words hung in the air, damning in their honesty. In that moment, I saw my father clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. Not as the distant parent I'd spent years trying to please, but as a selfish man who had never wanted me at all. Did you ever love me? I asked quietly. Even a little. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I need some air, Diane said, suddenly backing toward the door. I can't. I need to think. She turned and fled the study. Tiffany hesitated, torn between following her mother and staying with me. Go, I told her. Make sure she's okay. After Tiffany left, my father and I faced each other across the study, decades of unspoken truths between us. What now? He finally asked, his voice tight. You'll sue me. Drag the family name through the mud with a public court case. Is that what concerns you? Your reputation? I've worked 30 years to build my name in this community, he said defensively. I won't let you destroy that out of spite. I laughed, a hollow sound even to my own ears. That's what you think this is spite, Dad. I didn't even know about the money until tonight. I came to your wedding hoping stupidly that you might finally see me as someone worth knowing. Something flickered in his eyes, but it was quickly suppressed. What do you want from me, Anissa Money? I can write you a check right now. It's not about the money anymore, I said. It's about the truth. All these years I thought I wasn't good enough, that I'd done something wrong to make you stop loving me after Mom died. I blamed myself for your indifference. That's not my problem, he said coldly. No, it's not, I agreed. It's mine. And I'm done carrying it. A commotion from the foyer interrupted us. Voices raised in confusion, then Tiffany appeared in the doorway, her face pale. People are here, she said. Lots of people. From the wedding. I followed her to the front of the house, my father close behind. To my astonishment, at least 30 wedding guests were gathered in the circular driveway, including several I recognized from earlier interactions. Colonel Peters stood at the front, still in his formal wear, his expression grim. What's going on? My father demanded, pushing past me onto the front steps. We heard everything Greg said, an older woman I didn't recognize. She held up her phone. Diane's been live on the video call with her sister this whole time. She forgot to hang up when she got to the house. My father went deathly pale. That's an invasion of privacy, he sputtered. You can't just... Save it, Colonel Peters cut him off. We all heard you admit to stealing your daughter's inheritance. We heard you say you never wanted her in the first place. I spotted Diane standing to the side, tears streaming down her face as her sister comforted her. Several guests were awkwardly avoiding eye contact with my father, while others stared at him with undisguised contempt. This is a private family matter, my father insisted, his voice rising. All of you need to leave my property immediately. Actually, said a man stepping forward from the crowd. I'm Alan Webster, I'm an attorney, and I specialize in estate fraud. He handed me his business card. Lieutenant Colonel Harper, based on what I've heard tonight, you have an extremely strong case against your father. I'd be happy to represent you pro bono. This is ridiculous, my father exploded. You can't possibly believe her over me. I built something from nothing in this town. I've employed dozens of people. I've donated to every charity fundraiser for 20 years. With stolen money, someone in the crowd called out. My father turned to me, desperation replacing anger. Anissa, you can't do this to me. I'm your father. Yes, you are, I said quietly. And I've spent my entire life trying to earn your love and respect. I'm done trying. I turned to the attorney. Mr. Webster, I would appreciate your help in recovering what legally belongs to me. Not out of vengeance, but because it's what my mother and grandmother would have wanted. As the implications of what was happening sank in, my father seemed to physically diminish before my eyes. The confident, controlling man who had dominated my childhood suddenly looked old and afraid. You'll regret this, he said, but the threat sounded hollow even to him. No, Dad, I replied. The only thing I regret is that it took me so long to see the truth. The weeks following my father's wedding were a whirlwind of legal activity. Alan Webster proved to be as good as his word, taking my case immediately and assembling a team to dig through decades of financial records. The evidence we'd found in my father's study was just the tip of the iceberg. Your father was methodical. I'll give him that, Alan said during one of our meetings at his downtown office. He created a complex web of transfers and investments to obscure where the money went. But he got sloppy toward the end, especially when he started the construction company. We discovered that my father had not only stolen my inheritance, but had also committed tax fraud by failing to report the trust income. The lakefront cottage had been sold through a straw purchaser to hide the transaction from potential oversight. Most damning of all, he had forged my signature on documents when I turned 21, claiming I had declined my inheritance. 3 days after the wedding, Diane moved out of the Tudor house and filed for an annulment citing fraud and misrepresentation. She became an unexpected ally, providing additional documents she found in the house and testifying about conversations where my father had explicitly lied about my background. I'm so sorry for what he did to you, she told me over coffee one afternoon. I feel like such a fool for not seeing through him sooner. He fooled a lot of people for a very long time, I assured her. Myself included. My relationship with Tiffany evolved in surprising ways. Despite the awkward circumstances of our reunion, we discovered we had much in common beyond our military service. She had recently left the Army to pursue a degree in social work, hoping to help other veterans navigate civilian life. You were kind of my inspiration, she admitted during one of our now regular lunch meetings. The way you led with compassion as well as strength. I wanted to bring that same approach to helping people outside the military. As news of my father's fraud spread through the community, other family members I'd barely known reached out. My mother's cousin Jennifer contacted me from Seattle explaining that she'd tried to stay in touch after my mother died but had been told by my father that I wanted no contact with my maternal relatives. He returned all our letters and gifts, she told me tearfully during our first phone call. Eventually we stopped trying, which I regret more than I can say. Jennifer had photos of my mother. I'd never seen stories about her childhood I'd never heard. Each new connection helped fill in pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known was incomplete. 6 weeks after the wedding, criminal charges were filed against my father for fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The evidence was overwhelming, leaving his high-priced attorney little room to maneuver. Faced with the prospect of a public trial and potential prison time, he agreed to a plea deal. The terms were straightforward: full restitution of the stolen funds, plus interest, a suspended sentence with 5 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. He would also be required to dissolve his construction company and surrender his business licenses. The day he signed the plea agreement, I saw him for the first time since the night of the wedding. He looked diminished somehow, the confident swagger replaced by a hunched defensiveness. He didn't meet my eyes as the prosecutors outlined the terms. Only when the papers were signed and it was all official did he finally speak directly to me. I suppose you're happy now, he said bitterly. You've destroyed everything I built. You destroyed it yourself, Dad, I replied calmly. The moment you decided to steal from your own daughter? He had no answer for that. The financial resolution came next. With interest and penalties, the restitution amount totaled just over $900,000. My father was forced to sell the Tudor house and liquidate most of his assets to meet the obligation. The court appointed a special master to oversee the process, ensuring he couldn't hide or transfer anything else. Throughout it all, Tiffany remained steadfast in her support, despite the awkward position it put her in with her mother. Mom understands, she assured me. She's horrified by what Greg did. Besides, you saved my life in Afghanistan. Standing by you now is the least I can do. 3 months after the wedding, my father's business partner, Jerry, contacted me asking to meet. Over dinner at a quiet restaurant outside town, he confessed his role in the Michigan cottage scheme. I didn't know where the property came from, he insisted, though his averted eyes suggested otherwise. Greg said it was an investment he wanted to flip quickly. And you never questioned why he was selling it so far below market value, I asked skeptically. Jerry had the grace to look ashamed. I should have. That's on me. He slid a folder across the table. This won't make up for it, but I want you to have this. It's the original deed to the cottage. I bought it back last month. It's yours now, free and clear. I stared at the documents in disbelief. The lakefront property that should have been my connection to my mother's family was finally mine. Why, I asked. Jerry sighed heavily. Your mom was a good person. She tutored my son through his learning disabilities when no one else would take the time. I've carried the guilt about that cottage for years. It's time to make it right. As summer turned to fall, the legal proceedings were finally completed. The restitution payment was transferred to an account in my name, closing a chapter of injustice that had shaped my life without my knowledge. But perhaps the most surprising development came from Diane. Despite filing for annulment immediately after the wedding, the legal process had dragged on due to my father's objections. During a routine search of his financial records, her attorney discovered something shocking. He was skimming money from your company too, she told me, showing me the bank statements her lawyer had subpoenaed. He set up fake vendor accounts to funnel money into his personal investments. The revelation was the final straw for the court, which granted the annulment immediately on grounds of fraud. It also led to additional charges against my father, though these were eventually folded into his existing plea agreement with enhanced probation terms. Through it all, I continued my military career, taking a temporary assignment at the Pentagon while the legal matters resolved. The support from my chain of command was unwavering, with my commanding general personally assuring me that my family situation would not affect my service record or future promotions. In October, I received a call from my father's sister, Aunt Paula, whom I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. She had always been kind to me, but had moved to Arizona years ago, our contact limited to occasional birthday cards. I had no idea what my brother did to you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I've been going through Mom's things, your paternal grandmother's. She passed last month. I hadn't even known my paternal grandmother was ill. Another family connection my father had severed. I found a box with your name on it, Aunt Paula continued. It contains things that belong to your mother. Letters, jewelry, photographs. Mom kept them all these years, hoping someday to give them to you. I'd like to send them if you want them. The box arrived a week later. Inside were treasures beyond price, my mother's wedding ring letters she'd written during college, photos of her as a young woman with dreams and ambitions I'd never known about. There was also a handwritten letter from my paternal grandmother, dated just a month before her death. Anissa, it began. I've followed your military career from afar through newspaper clippings and what little information came my way. I want you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become despite the obstacles in your path. Your grandfather was a colonel in the army, and he would have been honored to see you carry on that tradition. I regret my silence over the years, but know that you were always loved, always remembered. As I read those words surrounded by pieces of my mother's life, and evidence of a grandmother's secret pride, I felt something shift inside me. The anger that had fueled me for months began to subside, replaced by a sense of connection to a family I was only now discovering. That night I called Tiffany and told her about the box of memories. I need a favor, I said. There's a promotion ceremony next month. I'm being considered for full colonel. Would you and your mom come? I'd like to have family there. Her immediate acceptance brought tears to my eyes. For the first time in decades, I wouldn't be standing alone at a significant moment in my life. I had found my way back to family, just not in the way I'd ever expected. The promotion ceremony took place on a crisp November morning at Fort Belvoir. The auditorium was filled with military personnel in their dress uniforms, the atmosphere formal yet celebratory. I stood backstage, straightening my uniform one last time before the ceremony began. Nervous, asked Colonel Matthews, my commanding officer. A little, I admitted. It's a big step. Well deserved, he assured me. Your leadership during the Kandahar operation alone would qualify you. Add in your work at the Pentagon this past year, and this promotion was never in question. The ceremony proceeded with military precision. When my name was called, I stepped forward to accept the Silver Eagle insignia that marked my new rank. As the pins were attached to my uniform, I scanned the audience. There, in the third row, sat Tiffany, beaming with pride. Beside her was Diane, and to my surprise, several other faces I recognized from recent months: Aunt Paula, who had flown in from Arizona, Jennifer, my mother's cousin, and even Alan Webster, who had become something of a friend during our legal battle. After the ceremony, we gathered for a celebration lunch at a nearby restaurant. Surrounded by this newly formed family of choice, I felt a sense of belonging that had eluded me for most of my life. "I have an announcement," I said once everyone was seated. "I've decided what to do with the restitution money." They all looked at me expectantly. "I'm establishing a foundation," I explained. "The Sarah Harper Memorial Foundation for Military Families. It will provide educational scholarships for children of fallen service members and support services for military families in crisis." "That's wonderful," Aunt Paula said, squeezing my hand. "Your mother would be so proud." "There's more," I continued. "I've allocated funds to restore the Michigan cottage. It will serve as a retreat for military families who need time to reconnect after deployments. Tiffany has agreed to help coordinate the program as part of her social work practicum." Tiffany raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she toasted. "And to family, both the ones we're born with and the ones we choose." As glasses clinked around the table, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey to this moment had been painful, but it had led me to a truth I might never have discovered otherwise. Later that afternoon, I visited my mother's grave for the first time in years. The cemetery was quiet, dappled sunlight filtering through the trees as I placed fresh flowers by her headstone. "I found my way, Mom," I said softly. "Not the way either of us would have expected, but I got here." A gentle breeze stirred the leaves around me, and I allowed myself to imagine it was her response. The following weekend, I made one final visit before taking up my new command position. My father had moved to a small apartment across town, his life dramatically reduced from the prominence he once enjoyed. I had debated whether to see him at all, but something compelled me to seek this last conversation. He looked surprised when he opened the door to my knock, then wary as he invited me in. The apartment was sparsely furnished, a stark contrast to the luxury he had surrounded himself with for decades. "Congratulations on your promotion," he said stiffly. "I saw the announcement in the newspaper." "Thank you." I remained standing, unwilling to extend this visit longer than necessary. "Why are you here, Anissa?" he asked after an awkward silence. "To see how far I've fallen." "No," I said quietly. "I came to return something." I handed him a small box. Inside was the burden I had carried since childhood, the desperate need for his approval, the belief that his rejection was somehow my failure. "I forgive you," I said simply. "Not because you deserve it, but because I don't want to carry this anymore." His hands trembled slightly as he took the box. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. I'm not looking for an apology or an explanation. I just wanted you to know that I'm at peace with who I am and where I came from. All of it, even the hard parts, made me who I am today." He nodded slowly, his eyes finally meeting mine. For a moment I thought I glimpsed regret in their depths, but perhaps that was just what I wanted to see. "You're very much like her," he said finally. "Your mother. She had that same strength." It was probably the closest thing to a compliment he had ever given me. As I turned to leave, he called after me. "Anissa, the foundation. It's a good thing you're doing." "I know," I replied. "That's why I'm doing it." Outside, the autumn sun warmed my face as I walked to my car. Ahead lay a new command, new responsibilities, and a family I had found through the most unexpected circumstances. Behind me was a past I had finally made peace with. My phone buzzed with a text from Tiffany Contractor approved the renovation plans for the cottage. "We can start work next month." I smiled as I typed my reply. Life had a way of coming full circle, of creating something beautiful from painful beginnings. The inheritance that had been stolen from me would now help countless military families. The father who had rejected me had inadvertently led me to connections that enriched my life. Even my military career, which began as an escape, had become the path to my greatest purpose. Have you ever found strength in the most unexpected places? Has betrayal ever ultimately led you to something better than what you lost? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes our greatest pain can lead to our greatest purpose if we have the courage to keep moving forward. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening, and remember that your worth is never determined by those who fail to see it.